Hey fellow fiends, how are you? This is Boogeyman Ben, your buddy, here with my friend Ray. We have done a couple of videos like this in the past where we talked about, once we talked about influential horror.
Yep.
Influential horror icons, movies, things like that. And then a year after that, we did underrated comic book movies.
Comic book superhero
movies. And both, yeah. So we talked about that, and we haven't done a segment like this in almost 4 years.
Almost.
Yeah, so we're here in his, what do you want to call this, Ray?
Well, this is my, my Halloween room here at my antique store in Point Richmond called Butch's Antiques and Collectibles. For those of you that remember, or for those of you that don't know, back in the day there was a TV show called Friday the 13th, the TV series, that had nothing to do with the movies.
Nope.
And the basic premise was you had an old guy who owned an antique store.
Louis Fondrady.
And him and his niece and nephew, wasn't it?
Yes.
Roby, hot.
Yeah.
They would go around finding haunted artifacts, and they would bring it back to the antique store and lock it away in the vault.
Do you have a vault?
Well, this is my vault.
Okay.
You're in my vault.
I'm
so
in
that
the
means
vault.
you're haunted.
So we're in the vault.
Yeah, we're haunted. We're haunted.
So we're going to be doing today, we're going to be talking about remakes, horror remakes. We're going to break it down into 3 different categories. So it's necessary remakes that were successful, necessary remakes that were unsuccessful, and then unnecessary remakes.
Yes.
And both of us have kind of taken the term necessary remakes that were unsuccessful in a different way. So
yes, the way I was thinking was that, or successful for that matter.
Yeah.
When it comes to horror movie remakes that I consider to be successful, I mean that they were good and they were actually necessary to make. Not necessarily financially successful, but in my opinion, they were successful movies.
Yeah. And the way that I took, like, necessary remakes that were unsuccessful, like, they should have made this movie, but it didn't find an audience. It didn't catch on. So it was one that they tried to reinvent a particular film or a film series, and it failed miserably, and they just scrapped it.
Yep.
So, all right, so do you want to, since we're in your vault, do you want to have the honors?
I would, it's my honor. All right. So I started out, and we're limiting ourselves.
5,
And also, we should make a point of this, that not all renditions of original source material can be considered a remake.
True.
For instance, the Kenneth Branagh Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is not a remake of the 1931 Karloff Frankenstein. That's a reinterpretation of Mary Shelley's novel. So something like that I don't consider a remake. It's just like a retelling of the original source material.
And there's 2 that I could put with that too, because I don't consider Red Dragon, which was made as Manhunter.
Right.
I don't consider Red Dragon a remake of that. I consider Red Dragon more of the source material that follows the book a little bit closer. The same thing with Stephen King's The Shining.
Yes.
I don't look at that as a remake of Kubrick's film. I look at that as King's version of his book.
Same thing with Bram Stoker's Dracula with Gary Oldman is nothing to do with being a remake of Bela Lugosi.
No.
Although, when I get to my necessary remakes that I think are successful, there's going to be a couple that kind of test that rule I just laid out there, but I'll explain my thinking.
Okay.
But yeah, so I started out, and we're limiting ourselves to like about 5 movies per category. So starting out, and this is in no particular order, one movie that I think was a completely unnecessary remake. The Omen in 2006.
Yes.
With Liev Schreiber.
I couldn't even finish it.
In my opinion, if you're going to remake a movie, in general, whether it be horror movie or whatever, if you're going to remake a movie, it should improve upon the original and or live up to the original, and it does not do that. Gregory Peck over Liev Schreiber all day long. Love Liev Schreiber, but it just didn't work. It just didn't work. So what about you? What's a completely unnecessary horror remake in your opinion?
The first one I'm going to go with, and I've talked about it before. I revisited this film last year when it was released by Scream Factory on Blu-ray. I did purchase it because I'm a completist, but I still don't think it needed to be made. That's Psycho by Gus Van Sant.
Check that off my list, because that is also on my list of unnecessary remakes.
With Psycho, I mean, it's a shot-for-shot remake. In fact, the rumor is that Gus Van Sant timed the actors so that they were saying the the lines from the script at the same rate that the actors were saying them in the original Psycho film by Alfred Hitchcock.
Right.
And you can tell, especially with Julianne Moore's performance, where it sounds like she's shouting the lines out or just rapidly speaking them. It doesn't seem natural. Why touch that film that was already beautifully acted, was done by the master of suspense himself? And I think the biggest reason they did it was because Scream had taken off at the box office. Horror was being reinvigorated. They wanted to do a color version of Psycho. They wanted to make it more shocking by putting in, nudity and Norman Bates masturbating while he watched Marion Crane get undressed before her shower, putting in a little bit more blood into it. But at the end of the day, it just seems like a hollow version of the original film.
I agree. Psycho, the original from 1960, right?
Yes.
It's lightning in a bottle.
Yeah. It's just perfect.
You only get it once. And it's something I don't think you can recreate. They tried, they failed. Unnecessary.
Very unnecessary.
So, Another unnecessary horror remake, in my opinion, was Nosferatu from 1979 with Klaus Kinski.
I was going to say, I've seen the original Nosferatu, but I've never seen the one with Klaus Kinski. I know there was a lot of drama on that film when they shot it because he was insane. From what I've heard. Yeah. But I've never seen the film.
Well, I mean, first of all, the original silent Nosferatu is a complete ripoff of Dracula. So did we really need a remake of a ripoff?
No.
No, we didn't. Also, the original Nosferatu, 1922, it was a masterpiece in German expressionistic filmmaking. And the remake, first of all, was in color. It was a talkie.
Yeah.
There was no background music or soundtrack or anything like that, so it was just like harsh audio. And they tried to kind of go like all art house on us, and it just doesn't live up to the original by any means. Now, I hear that they're going to be making a new one.
I did.
With Doug Jones.
And he would be good.
He would be really good.
He'd be good.
But if they do a new remake of Nosferatu, I hope they at least take some elements of the original black and white, especially the shadows. If they do that, I think I'll probably like it, but still consider it to be unnecessary.
Yeah, it's already perfect.
Yeah. So Nosferatu 1979, completely unnecessary in my opinion.
Okay, next for me, an unnecessary remakes is Nightmare on Elm Street. That was done by Samuel Behr in 2010.
Okay. That's on my necessary but unsuccessful.
Okay.
But feel free to tell me, why do you think it's completely unnecessary?
For me, it's unnecessary. I think it's just because of its execution. It was sort of like they were trying to recapture what Wes Craven had done beautifully in the original Nightmare on Elm Street with a cast that wasn't as interesting. They had a setup that sort of reinterpreted scenes that we had seen done very much more successfully in the original Nightmare on Elm Street. Then making Freddy a pedophile was something else that Wes Craven had initially thought about doing but pulled back and didn't do it. And I felt like there was an element of the remake that could have been successful in the kids maybe accusing him of doing something to them and not being, and then them lying.
Yeah.
So that way, if the townspeople had killed him and he hadn't done the crime, then that made more sense for him to come back. But when you find out that no, he really did do it, then
they had every right to.
So it's like it's just I just thought it was messy and they could have done it a little bit better. I think that's why I put it as unnecessary, because I feel like there was so many elements that could have worked better. Maybe it would have fit better in my necessary remakes that were unsuccessful. But
well, the reason why it's in my necessary remakes that was unsuccessful is because, with the exception of New Nightmare and Freddy vs. Jason, the original movie and the sequels, while I love them, they are definitely a product of their time. They're a little bit dated.
Yeah.
It's very 80s. And I could see a want for a modern take.
Revitalization kind of thing. Yeah.
Of Nightmare on Elm Street.
And I get that. I do get it.
Yeah, but the fact that Jackie Earle... Well, and also there was a lot of moments in the original movies that were a little bit over the top campy.
Yeah, especially as they went on. I think after you got past like Dream Warriors, they got more campy as they went. Especially like Freddy's Dead, the Final Nightmare was even the campiest.
It was the campiest of
all. Yeah,
all.
I mean, he was riding a broom like the Wicked Witch from Wizard of Oz. I mean, come on.
So for that reason alone, I could see why it would be a want or a need for a new take on Nightmare on Elm Street. It's just this one didn't work.
No,
and for
not at all.
many of the reasons that you just stated. And also, despite the campy nature of Robert Englund of times, especially as the movies went on, and as much as I love Jackie Earle Haley, he just could not fill those shoes.
No, and I think the going back to it a little bit is, I feel like if you're going to reinvent a character, you need to reinvent a character. And he looked like he was wearing Robert Englund's costume. He had the same hat, the sweater, everything was the same. And it just looked like a smaller actor in that costume, and it just came off as silly. It didn't.
A little bit.
There was nothing scary about him. I thought he was scarier as Rorschach in
Yeah.
Watchmen
Oh,
than
God,
he was as
yeah.
Freddy Krueger.
He
And
kicks so much
just
ass
the voice
in
and the mask. I mean, he commands a presence. He has a very strong presence, and he's a good actor. He's a great actor.
He's fantastic.
Yeah, he's a great actor.
But not a good Freddy.
Not a good Freddy. But I feel like mine, now I think about it, I think I should have said necessary. That was one of the ones that was unsuccessful.
I think it's heads or tails,
Yeah, okay.
honestly,
All
with
right.
that one.
Yeah.
So another horror movie remake that I think was completely unnecessary, Poltergeist 2015.
I've never seen it. I refused.
Yeah.
I
I mean,
refused
Sam
to see
Rockwell is
I
an
love
amazing
Sam
actor,
Rockwell,
but
yeah.
Craig T. Nelson,
You can't beat him.
He carried it.
Yeah.
He carried that movie. Look, the original movie, the original story, the original special effects, it all still holds up today, and it suffers the same thing that The Omen suffers, is that it doesn't do anything to improve upon the original. It doesn't live up to the original. It just kind of fell flat for me. I was not impressed. Not at all.
Okay, so unnecessary remake for me, number 3 would be Carrie. The remake of Carrie that came out in 2013, starring Chloe Grace Moretz. And I loved her from like Kick-Ass as Hit Girl. She's a great actress. But I've read the book. I've seen the Brian De Palma movie that we all know. Chloe Grace Moretz is too beautiful to play Carrie. Carrie is supposed to be a outcast. Yeah. And you look at Chloe Grace Moretz and go, she's not an outcast. Or she just was. It just. And again, talking about what you were saying about The Omen and Poltergeist, it didn't do anything new. It presented the same situations in a PG-13 format. It wasn't a bad movie. There's some effects in it that I thought were really well done. And you do see that Carrie has more of a way of controlling her abilities in this one. But at the end of the day, even with Julianne Moore playing the part of the mother that Piper Laurie played so well in the original, it still just didn't work, and it didn't need to be done. It was their third remake of the film because they did a television version of it
in
2002.
Yes.
And I never saw it.
I did. And so I agree with you completely. And that would be on another longer list of my unnecessary remakes. And I get what they were trying to do. They're trying to
make it for another
make it for this generation and update it to this decade and all of that. But they already did that with the TV movie. The TV movie was really good. It did the job of updating it to the 2000s. The Chloe Grace Moretz one is completely unnecessary. I highly agree. So the last one I have on my horror movie remakes that was completely unnecessary, Night of the Living Dead, 1990.
Really? You didn't like that one?
I'll tell you why.
That was Savini directed that.
I know, and I love Tom Savini.
Yeah, and it's got Tony Todd.
Tony Todd.
They've been. He was great.
I know, but I felt like I was basically watching the original one, just with different actors.
In color.
In color.
Yeah.
Yeah. It didn't. It was like watching the exact same thing, and I was like, this brings nothing new to the table. It's just different actors doing the exact same thing as the original one. I think that The Night of the Living Dead is the closest one out of all of those to being like an almost carbon copy of the original. At least the newer Omen had some different stuff going on. Poltergeist had a couple of different things going on, But Night of the Living Dead, I was just like, deja vu.
Yeah.
So I thought it was unnecessary.
The next unnecessary one, I got a couple more unnecessary.
Oh yeah, let's bring it.
So first one I want to talk about, and I'm going to talk about this one real quick because I've only seen it one time, and it was like 11 years ago, The Fog.
Oh, with the Superboy.
Yeah, and Selma Blair played the Adrienne Barbeau character. This movie was garbage.
It was.
Because the fog effects were cool, but the cast, there was nowhere near the charisma that we had in the original with Tom Atkins, Adrienne Barbeau, Jamie Lee Curtis, Janet Leigh, Hal Holbrook.
Yeah.
You have a fantastic cast in that original film. The original Fog is still, I think, terrifying. And this one was just laughable. It was just absolutely horrible. And I don't care how many special effects you throw at it.
Yeah.
Nothing can replace that original film in the way that it made me feel.
You know, every once in a while, Hollywood will remake something or they'll write something brand spanking new specifically to showcase new talent. Tom Welling was on top of the world in Smallville.
Yeah.
And
I never watched it.
It was probably their way of trying to break him into film.
Probably. I didn't see that.
I could see that too, and it was unsuccessful.
The last one I have for Unnecessary Remakes, and this, it's funny because I saw this one before the original, then I saw the original, and I couldn't stand the remake, and that was Black Christmas.
Okay.
Have you seen the Black Christmas?
I've seen the original Black Christmas. I've not seen the remake.
The remake, I did a review of it last year for Christmas because I was doing Christmas-themed horror, and I talked about both films. And I did mention I had seen Black Christmas, the remake, before I saw the original, and I loved the original. I absolutely, Bob Clark, fantastic cast, Margot Kidder, Olivia Hussey, John Saxton.
Yep.
The remake has some good elements to it because it's pretty much the same thing. It's the sorority house, Christmas Eve, killer and everything. You find out more about the killer in this one, whereas in the original, it was Billy was just, it was a voice, it was a shadow, it was like a silhouette, just his eye through a doorway. In this one, you find out all about his backstory. It's like you find out that his sister is really his daughter, that his mother raped him, and all this stuff. Like, it just takes it so far, it just doesn't work.
I mean, I'll tell you, nothing puts a damper on Christmas morning than finding out that your sister is your daughter.
That is not a Merry
from
Christmas.
being raped by your mother.
It was shocking because sometimes I'll watch a remake and then I'll watch the original and go, oh, okay, maybe this remake's a little bit better. I see why they did that. This was one where I saw the exact opposite. Wow. Yeah, so that's the last one for me.
Alrighty, so now going into necessary but unsuccessful. And so we already talked about one of them, which was the Nightmare on Elm Street remake.
You talked about that one.
So,
and mine could have fit in there too.
Yeah, either way.
Yeah.
First, necessary but unsuccessful. I'm going to say it like that.
Yeah, I know. That's good. I like that.
So this was necessary but unsuccessful. You're going to get sick of that.
I won't do that.
First one on my list is The Island of Dr. Moreau from 1996.
And that was with Val Kilmer and
Marlon
Brando.
And Fairuza Balk.
Wow. I haven't seen, I saw that once.
Yeah.
A long time ago. Probably in 1996.
Probably. I've seen it numerous times, like on reruns on cable movie channels and whatnot. But here's why I think it was necessary. Knowing what we now know scientifically about genetics and gene editing and cloning and splicing, all that kind of stuff, this was a wise choice for a remake. Because when you read the original novel by H.G. Wells, when you see the original movie with Charles Laughton from 1932, I believe it is, and when you see the Charlton Heston one from the 70s, it focuses only really on vivisection. It focuses only on turning these beasts into beast men through means of surgery. In the 1996 one, they decide to incorporate DNA. He talks about how he incorporated human DNA along with the surgical procedures to create these beast men. And I'm thinking, that's brilliant. That's necessary. That's a great reason to remake this movie because of everything that we know now about biology and genes and splicing and all that stuff. But unfortunately, it's an awful movie. I loved Fairuza Balk. I thought she was a great Panther girl. I loved Ron Perlman as the Sayer of the Law.
I don't remember any of them in this movie because it's been so long.
Yeah, and but Marlon Brando and Val Kilmer, their performances they just ruined the film. And I can't remember the name of the British actor who played the stowaway. He's very well respected. And
I know who he is, but I can't think of him.
Yeah,
for some reason. I remember him a little bit, but first of all,
I thought his performance was great, especially when he was running from the creatures in the jungle. But Overall, the movie itself was a bad movie. Mm-hmm. So it was a great idea to remake it. It was a bomb.
Yeah. So for me, with my necessary remakes that were unsuccessful, one of them that I want to talk about is The Wolfman.
Ooh.
Because, and I'm looking at it not from that I didn't enjoy it. I'm looking at it from that it didn't perform. Gotcha. It didn't do well. It didn't catch on. And I think it was timing. That was when Twilight was really big, was when The Wolfman came out. But that's why I think this movie wasn't successful, and it should have been. Yeah. Because I think it was really well done. There were some things I didn't like about it. I didn't like the fact that the transformation scene was done in CGI instead of practical. Mm-hmm. Because Rick Baker was the one that came on board to do the werewolf makeup, mm-hmm. and he initially had created a transformation scene that they scrapped for a digital, the CGI change. The mood, the acting, Anthony Hopkins I've always loved. I thought that Benicio del Toro did a great job in it. Hugo Weaving was fantastic in it, and Emily Blunt was great. Everybody was great, and I loved the look of it. And it was brutal. It was brutal, it was gory and bloody, and I'm like, okay, this is what I want to see in a werewolf movie. It broke my heart that it didn't do well. Yes. Because I wanted to see a resurgence of monster movies. And people may not remember, because now we're living in the heyday of horror. You have horror on television, it's successful at the box office again, but 10 years ago, it was not. No. You were seeing things like True Blood and Twilight and things that were kind of taking monsters and making them more palatable to the masses. We're making them more attractive so that more people will watch and be interested. And I wanted to return to the stuff that I grew up with, like The Howling or American Werewolf in London or Silver Bullet. And that's what I thought this movie had, Wolfman. It had that
feel to it.
And I love it.
That's why I consider it a success, mm-hmm. is because it is that type of classic type of universal horror monster movie. They got it completely right. They brought the classic character to a new generation, and they came up with ideas that were different from the original. The original that came out in 1941 was set in 1941. Mm-hmm. They set the new Wolfman in Victorian times. And so when they had the sequence after he got captured, and the Victorian scientists and psychologists and doctors of the day were having their symposium on him and how it was a trick of the mind and this and that. I think that was brilliant, because that's what Victorian scientists would have done at the time.
They put him in ice and all that. Yeah, I remember that.
Then he just went all werewolf and just wrecked those doctor motherfuckers. But yeah, it's the funny thing is, now they have this up in the air universal dark universe thing that started off with the Tom Cruise Mummy, mm-hmm. and what's his name, Russell Crowe's Dr. Jekyll is
he's kind of like the Nick Fury.
He's the Nick Fury.
Yeah, he's the Nick Fury.
Of that. And apparently the next one was supposed to be Bride of Frankenstein.
They were doing Bride of Frankenstein and The Invisible Man. Yeah. Johnny Depp was going to be the Invisible Man.
That's right. Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what. If they had the foresight and if they had the balls, The Wolfman 2010 would have been the ultimate way to reintroduce and kick off a reboot of the Universal horror monster movies. Mm-hmm. Yes. Next one for
necessary remakes that were unsuccessful.
Necessary that were unsuccessful. Yeah. Fright Night 2011.
It's funny, I have it on my list for a different reason of it being unsuccessful. And again, mine goes to that it didn't make any money. Yeah. And again, came out at a time when that's not what people wanted to see.
Yeah. Again, very true.
So you go ahead.
Well, I was saying, I love the original. It's great.
It's one of my favorite movies.
But it, the Freddy movies, it's a little dated.
It's an 80s movie. It's a very 80s movie.
But the remake, if you're going, again, one thing in my opinion, if you're going to remake a movie, you should at least have some sort of nostalgia factor for the original. Mm-hmm. Not copy it completely, but there should be some nods that give the viewer some nostalgia towards the original. Mm-hmm. I didn't have any of that with this
one. It didn't really have it, because it changed a lot of things. It wasn't no longer a horror host. He was a magician. Right. Peter Vincent character. Charlie was it was almost weird, the way that they changed it up so like Evil Ed was more the one that says, hey, this is a vampire, and Charlie was the one going, no, I don't believe in that crap. They reversed that.
Yeah.
So that was kind of odd at first, but...
I mean, I get that they were trying to kind of do their own thing and make it be more of an actual, like, scary vampire movie, whereas the original was kind of like a buddy movie as well as a vampire movie.
It was kind of a throwback because it came out in the time when it was like... I mean, Peter Vincent has that line where he said, people just want to see demented madmen running around in ski masks, hacking up young virgins.
Right.
So it's like
It's hilarious. They got it. It was like an in-joke.
It was an in-joke because that was what was selling at the time. People weren't watching vampire movies. No. So it's like, that's why they did it.
I feel as if they probably just should have taken that cast, created a completely new vampire movie, and had nothing to do with Fright Night. Colin Farrell, he was pretty good.
I thought he was good as Jerry Dandridge.
I think, were it a different movie, were it not associated with Fright Night, and it was, it was him playing a vampire, I'm sure it would have been a lot better.
There was no real kind of callbacks to the original. There was very, very small ones, like You're So Cool, Brewster was, I think, once used in it, but... For the most part, it was a brand new cast playing very different versions of established characters,
and sometimes that works. This time it didn't.
For the one that didn't work for me was I think his name is Christopher Plesset. He played Evil Ed. I did not care for him as that character. There was just nothing about that character that screamed what Stephen Jeffries brought to that role. But I liked the fact that it was a brutal vampire movie. I thought that there was some elements of it that, they made Jerry Dandridge less of a romantic and more of a shark. He was kind of like, that's what they said, they portrayed him like a shark. He just went after his victims. He didn't care how. That's the way he did it. In a time where we weren't seeing those kinds of vampire movies, it could have worked. And I think it could have started something where we were getting the more gruesome vampire movies that had been long forgotten.
If they had done their own thing, and basically made a new vampire movie with Colin Farrell as the vampire.
Yeah, instead of making it tied to Fright Night. Yeah.
Well, and even if they still called it Fright Night and basically rebooted it as opposed to remaking it, that might have worked better. Had he been a different vampire character, had it not been Charlie, but a new person and all this and that. But no, they went ahead and they remade Fright Night. And, it was both unsuccessful financially and unsuccessful personally.
Yeah, there you go.
So you're up.
Okay, so one for me that I actually really liked, and I love the original too, featuring C. Thomas Howell and Rutger Hauer, was The Hitcher. The remake of that was done by Platinum Dunes. That was when they were doing their remakes. They had, I think Texas Chainsaw Massacre had come out. They had done a couple others. This was prior to Nightmare and Friday the 13th. But I thought the Hitcher remake was really well done. I thought Sean Bean was a really good, I don't think he's as terrifying. There's something about Rutger Hauer that's just terrifying. I don't know what it is about him. It's just his stance, his look.
Yeah.
But Sean Bean is a very good actor, and I thought it was a good then
recast.
Yeah, recast it, and then it was different in this one because the Jim character that C. Thomas Howell played, and I can't remember the name of the actor that played him in the remake, but in the original he's by himself, and in the new one it's him and his girlfriend. But I thought it worked well. There was some really good moments in it. They changed some things around while still paying homage to the original. The ending was a little bit different, and sort of the conclusion for one of the characters really shocked me, like where they went with it, because it wasn't what I was expecting. But I thought that they did a good job with it, and it was one that just didn't connect with audiences. But I thought it was one that was good for a remake because the first one took place in 86 or 85, 86. This one came out in 2006 or 2007, I believe. And I thought it was one that, I could see them remaking this one because who talks about that movie? Who was talking about that movie at that time?
No.
And that's a good way to sort of bring people attention, like, hey, this movie exists, you could source material here, and then a lot of times people discover older movies that way.
Yeah.
But this is one that just sort of fell off the rails.
Yeah, so that one, in your opinion, was successfully good
in execution, but in terms
of box office.
But box office, it failed.
Yeah.
So
I got to be honest, I have not seen the remake.
I like it, and I have both of them, and I actually enjoy watching both of them.
So another necessary but unsuccessful remake, in my opinion, Texas Chainsaw Massacre from 2003.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Look, the original was done on the cheap. The original didn't have the best actors, especially the dude in the wheelchair.
Okay.
But when the action scenes and when shit goes down in the original movie, it is dirty. You feel it in your gut. It is dirty. It is visceral. You feel like an animal being hunted. I didn't feel that way with the new one. I didn't feel that way with the 2003. The remake doesn't really have that for me. And that might be just because of me personally, maybe because I've seen the original so many times and I love it so much that seeing the remake, I'm just like, meh.
See, it's funny. That's one of my necessary remakes that were successful.
Ah.
So I love the remake of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and I think it's because I didn't really watch the original that much growing up. It was one of those ambiguous movies that I heard about, that I rented maybe 1 or 2 times, and then just sort of forgot about it. And then when the remake came out, I said, oh, I had seen some of the sequels. I had seen like Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3 and then The Next Generation with Matthew McConaughey, which was a horrible movie. And I said, okay, well, they've gone pretty much off the rails with the original timeline. This is one that I think is begging to be redone, remade, and brought to a new generation. And I remember like the people saying, no, you don't touch this movie, you don't touch the original. Right. It's people, there was fanatics about that film, and it was just such a cultural phenomenon. It was one of those films that just, there was so much history about what went into making it, and it was, like you said, you feel dirty watching that film. You feel like you are Sally jumping out that window, running away from them. But I really enjoy the
limping away.
Yeah, limping. Yeah, she was pretty fucked up. But yeah, the remake I actually really enjoyed. It's probably one of my favorite remakes, and I do just to sort of come bounce off of that. The beginning, which was a prequel to the remake, I think has more of that feel that you're looking for with the grittiness, the cannibalism, because that was completely glossed over in the remake of Texas Chainsaw. But the beginning is a really good movie if you haven't seen it.
Okay, I'll have to check.
You should check that one out. It does have the same cast. It's done by a different director, but it takes place 3 years before the remake does. So you see how Monty ended up in the wheelchair. You see, how Sheriff Hoyt became sheriff. You see, like, what caused Leatherface to start doing what he was doing.
See, I'm wondering if I see that one, and after I see it, then I rewatch the remake. If maybe I'll appreciate the remake a little more.
But there are people that say, the remake is very glossy looking. It doesn't have the grit that the original one has.
Well, the original one, the lighting was harsh. It was like kind of film grainy and all this.
It was like a Super 8, almost like an 8 millimeter.
It was like a
film.
Super 8 film, and it felt like I was watching a snuff film.
That's what so many people say.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
And you know what? If it weren't for one particular movie, I probably never would have seen the original Summer School with Mark Harmon.
Chainsaw and
If
Dave.
it weren't for Mark Harmon wearing the Diablo Valley college T-shirt and having Chainsaw and Dave. I probably never, because that movie came out in '88 when I would have been 12 going on 13, summer school. And then,
that was the Tobayer Classic is what they call it.
Yeah. And so I was like 12, 13, years old, right around there. And I was already into horror, but I didn't know about the Texas Chainsaw Horror Massacre until I saw Summer School. Yeah. And then I was like, shit, I have to see this movie.
And I think that's what kind of got me into it, too, because I had never seen it before. I was like, now I'm curious. I want to check these out. And I've grown to love the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and I do love it more than the remake now, but I really do appreciate the remake. So,
that was me. So now it is your turn.
So we were talking about the Dark Universe, the Mummy movie that did come out.
Yeah.
I actually was for them rebooting bring the classic Universal monsters back.
I'm all for it too.
But I thought the execution of the Mummy could have been. It was a necessary remake that did not work, and it didn't work on a structural level or a financial level, because the thing is that they weren't focused on the monsters. They made it a Tom Cruise vehicle that was almost like Mission Impossible meets the Mummy. Yeah. And there's elements of that film that I enjoy. I actually thought it was kind of interesting that if there was a character like Mr. Hyde that was kind of bringing all these things together, that I said, okay, that's kind of interesting, but again, you have a model that is Marvel.
Yeah.
And instead of making this something that is already established and has been established for years, you have such a great cast of characters that you could do so much with, and you choose to make it this kind of generic, very by-the-numbers movie. And the woman that played the Mummy, I thought, was very intimidating. She did a great job, but she was just given just very kind of nothing really to work with or anything to really make that character her own. It's just like, and I just felt like it was an interesting idea that I thought could have been successful, but I think it's the mistake is that they're making it starring vehicles. They're making it vehicles for well-known actors. And
on top of that, they're also they're trying to follow the Marvel model.
Yeah, the blueprint that Marvel has put out. And
exactly.
You can't do that.
You look at the original, and we got Frankenstein playing right now.
Yeah.
The original Universal Studios monster movies, each monster movie was its own standalone, right? Mm-hmm. And it wasn't until like Frankenstein meets the Wolfman that we realized that they're in the same universe.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until House of Frankenstein that we realized that they're all in the same universe and all this and that, and with the monster movie mashups and whatnot. So, like I was saying, going back to the Wolfman, had they had this idea to reboot the Universal Studios monsters, which I'm wearing tonight, this glows in the dark, by the way. If they had that idea to do that back then, but followed the formula that they did in the 30s and the 40s and just have standalone monster movies come out like every single, October, and then bring them all together, that would have worked. But the way that they're doing the Dark Universe with the whole,
I think it's
wannabe Avengers.
I don't think it's going to happen now because the Mummy wasn't successful. So, I mean, it was like it crashed and burned on arrival. It just did not... It didn't find an audience, and everybody looked at it like it's the Tom Cruise movie.
Yeah.
And not, here's this interesting monster that we're going to see across this, and then we're going to expand it and show these other monsters. It was all just about Tom Cruise and exposition. It was nothing...
And it really didn't, harken back that much to the original, Mummy with Boris Karloff. I mean, at least the Hammer remake, from the late... It was basically a remake of the Mummy. I mean, it changed a couple of things, but it incorporated, some of the aspects of the sequels to the original Mummy movie, like the Mummy's Hand and the Mummy's Tomb and stuff like that. Where the mummy is being controlled by somebody.
Yeah.
At least Hammer was able to do that. But this new Mummy movie doesn't really harken back to the classic Universal Boris Karloff Mummy.
They stripped the horror out of it. They made him an action movie.
But what's funny is that's what the Brendan Fraser Mummy was too. It was an action movie with a mummy, but at least the mummy was scary.
Yeah, and it had some campiness to it, and it made fun. It was like it made fun of itself in spots.
It did.
And I liked that first one.
Yeah, I like the first one a lot too. So the last one that I have that is
unsuccessful,
necessary yet unsuccessful, was 13 Ghosts from 2001.
Really? You didn't like that one?
Yeah. Well, it's not that I didn't completely dislike it, but yes, the original one, the William Castle one from the 1960s. Yes, I think it was a good idea to remake that movie. Mm-hmm. And the 2001 version is, like you said, it's visually extremely interesting.
Yeah, the house.
What with the house and all really the different cages, and then this ghost gets out, but then this one gets trapped, and all this and that.
That was cool.
Having to deal with that. That's a great premise. Very interesting. Wish the characters were just as interesting. I didn't care about them. I didn't care about Tony Shalhoub. I didn't care about Matthew Lillard. Yeah. You get eaten by a ghost, you get eaten by a ghost. See it, bye. I think it was a good idea to reboot, but it didn't execute well.
The last one for me, necessary remakes that were unsuccessful, and again, this is, I think, box office wise, because I actually enjoy this film, and I love the original, Wax.
Oh, yeah. And that was in 3D too, wasn't it?
No, I don't think.
No, the original
Vincent
Price one.
The Vincent Price one was in 3D. This one, because when they first said they were making House of Wax, this was also done by Dark Castle. They put Paris Hilton in it, and I'm like going,
oh yeah.
But and I don't she's not that bad at it. She's not a completely unlikable character, which is I thought they were just going to make her completely over the top or something. But I actually thought it was a really well executed film because it wasn't a carbon copy of the original film with Vincent Price. It reinterpreted it. It brought it into a modern age. And you had Jared Padalecki, who was one of his first things. You had Alicia Cuthbert, who was successful on 24. Mm-hmm. I liked the whole idea of it because it dealt with this town that was kind of all of everybody in the town had been turned into wax figures, and the whole wax museum was made out of wax, and there was some really good visuals in it, really creepy, that almost gave it a Leatherface kind of vibe. They're the main adversary in it. Looked a little bit menacing, like the guy that played Leatherface in the remake, but there was some creepy moments in it, and I actually thought it was well executed. It's not one I watch all the time, and I don't think it's as good as the original, but it was one that I think could have found an audience if they would have released it at a different time.
That's hot. So let's see here.
Now we're under
necessary and successful
remakes.
So instead of going down, we're going up.
All right.
Necessary and successful. The first one that I had was The Wolfman. I thought it was a successful movie. Didn't do too well at the box office, but
successful
in terms of execution.
Got it.
And that's primarily where I'm going with this.
Okay. And that's kind of where I'm going too with these.
Yeah.
I feel like, but most of these were successful in both areas. They're successful in execution and in financial.
Oh, one of mine isn't.
Okay.
But it got a following. But anyway, so the next one I'm going to talk about, necessary and successful, The Fly from 1986.
One of the greatest remakes ever made.
Exactly.
So good.
And kind of like with Dr. Moreau, knowing what we now know, scientifically and genetics and whatnot, yada, 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 even though this was 1986, it was a good idea to remake this film. I mean, aside from the whole teleportation thing, it was new characters and new plot, new love triangle thing and whatnot. But as opposed to having a husband and wife, you got these, it's different dynamic. Because you got the woman, you got the scientist, you got her ex-boyfriend who's jealous and whatnot. But, I think, and of course where Moreau failed, this succeeded.
Oh, absolutely. Well, Cronenberg, I mean.
I know.
Yeah.
I mean, the special effects were awesome. The acting was
Still,
awesome.
yeah.
The baboon was awesome. And
until he turned into a puddle.
No, the one that survived.
Okay, good. Yeah,
because we only like survivors.
Yeah, no
puddle baboons.
Oh, terrible.
Because of the same reasons. Scientifically, it updated it for the times, but it was still an amazing horror movie. Had plenty of humor too, which is nice.
But I saw it in the
Jeff
theater.
Goldblum.
I saw it in the theater.
Yeah.
I was 12. Scared the crap out
I
of me.
bet it did.
It made me sick because of the fly vomit scenes.
Oh, when he vomited on his hand and he's like, my hand is missing.
And then he vomited on his foot too.
Yeah. The crazy part about that is that the first shot was of Jeff Goldblum in makeup. And then it looks away to the ex-boyfriend, and then it turns back to Jeff Goldblum, and it's obviously an animatronic and rubber, face of his head, and he smiles, and it's like double Joker grin, and just
still
man, love that movie.
Still good.
So yes, that was not only necessary, but it was successful. Both, I think,
it did well. I know it did well. All right, so number one for me on necessary remakes that were successful: Friday the 13th.
Okay.
It's more of a reboot than a remake, but again, Nightmare on Elm Street got everything wrong by trying to make a direct remake of the original. Friday the 13th took elements from the first three films and made a really successful story. They reinvented Jason as more of a survivalist. He was this hunter that was raised in the woods. He had to live by his instincts. He created a tunnel system under Crystal Lake, so that explained how he got around. He was good with a bow and arrow. He was almost like a Rambo version of Jason. And a lot of people didn't like that, but where I thought it was great is that they reinvented the character. Once you had Jason X, where Jason went to space, there's nowhere else you could go with that original franchise.
It's such a guilty pleasure.
I love Jason X. I do.
It's an awful movie, but I
love it for its campiness.
Yes.
It's like you have to enjoy it just for that. But Jason, they never made fun of Jason. Like Freddy became a cartoon character at some points, but with Jason, they never made fun of him. But it got to a point where you weren't afraid of him.
Right.
And I felt like the remake brought the fear back. I thought Derek Mears did a great job of taking, because he was very inspired heavily by Ted White, who had played him in Final Chapter, and he grew up having he had alopecia, so he grew up having very little hair, and he saw himself like Jason as a kid, so that being a fan and having that growing up, he really put that into the character, and I think he just made one of the best Jasons that's ever been captured on film. And I just thought the location was great, the cast was great. It really just took elements that I loved from the Friday the 13th films and put them all into one package, and I thought it was really successful, and I think it gets a lot of shit unfairly. And it will always be my favorite remake. I just think it was really well done.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. It's not my favorite Friday the 13th movie, but I enjoyed it.
Yeah, no, and I know there's people that either hate it or they just say, oh, I like certain elements of it. Yeah, I mean, I absolutely love that remake, and I think it was very successful, both financially and in execution.
So, remember how I was talking about how some of my choices might actually stretch the law that I laid down about not being more of a remake or being more of a reimagining of the source material? This one's kind of both. And it was not originally financially successful, but it found its audience. But in my opinion, it was an extremely successful and needed remake and reimagining of the source material at the same time. The Thing, 1982.
Oh, God.
The original source material was the short story Who Goes There by John Campbell?
I think
Is
so.
it Joseph Campbell?
I think it's John Campbell.
I think it's John
If
W.
it's wrong, I'll put it down below.
Yeah, I think it's John W. Campbell. And the original movie from the 1950s, The Thing from Another World. Okay, the only thing that it really has in common with the novel or the novella is that it takes place in an isolated Antarctic research station. And obviously there's an alien ship.
Yeah.
But they change the alien from being a shapeshifter, and this is probably due to budget concerns and special effects abilities of the time. He was basically an intelligent vegetable man. He was like a sentient vegetable life form that was humanoid. And the woman even says in the movie, when they're figured out that he's a vegetable that eats blood, I'm not making this stuff up. And they realize that he's technically like a sentient vegetable. The woman on the base suggests, well, what do you do with a vegetable? You cook it. Yeah. And that's how they decide they're going to kill the creature.
By cooking it.
And they rig up these electrical things on the thing. They electrify him, and he shrinks down to tiny, and then he disappears completely. Yeah,
the original.
It's fun.
It's John Carpenter's one of his favorite movies.
Yeah,
and that's why he did the remake.
Yeah, it's a fun movie, the one from the 50s, but it's that same kind of formulaic 1950s sci-fi horror. Because at the time, that's what was really being focused on in the 50s. It was more sci-fi, but to keep it from being too cerebral scientifically, they always threw in
a horror element,
a horrific alien. When you look at This Island Earth, it's a sci-fi movie completely, but they had to throw in the Metalunan, who was the giant
Metalunan mutant.
Who was the big-headed
blue kind
of half sentient bug man. So you had that. Yeah, with also around that same time you had The Mole People.
Oh yeah,
that was a science fiction movie through and through, but you had to have the ugly mole people.
The Morlocks too, the time machine.
Yeah,
thing. I was going to say that's one.
But that was part of the original source material, though. Whereas I think The Thing from Another World obviously was based on the novella, but they changed it completely. So that's why The Thing from 1982 it's kind of a remake of The Thing from Another World, but it's also a reimagining of the source material, and it is almost completely faithful to the original source material.
See, I've never read the book either, the story, but I did put that down as a successful remake. I mean, it wasn't financially successful initially, though, because it did come out the same year E.T. came out, and nobody wanted to see John Carpenter's film, and he even said he lost another big picture deal because that film didn't do well. But now people absolutely love The Thing, and it's one of some people's favorite movies ever made. And
It's
every time I see it on TV, I watch it. I have the Scream Factory release
Absolutely.
of it. I mean, it's a fantastic movie. One of my favorite John Carpenter films. I think just after Halloween. Yeah, I love The Thing. is such a fantastic film.
Oh, So it's kind of a remake of Thing from Another World, but it's closer to being a reimagining, or I should say,
of the story
of the original short story.
Okay, so next one for me, necessary remakes that were successful, The Hills Have Eyes.
Ooh, that's a good one.
By
it's not on my list, but
Alexandre Aja. It was a remake of Wes Craven's original film that I actually, now again, this is when I saw the remake first, then I saw Wes Craven's film. I didn't like Wes Craven's film.
Wow.
And I'm sorry, I love Wes Craven as a director. I think he's a brilliant director. But for some reason, I think it's just because the remake it was so well done and so in your face and gory and disturbing with the way that these nuclear fallout people looked. It disturbed me. I mean, these people looked... they were just jacked up.
Yeah.
And just some of the subject matter and the family, and you had Ted Levine in it. You had such a great cast, and that film just affected me. And I think if I would have saw them in the opposite order, I might feel differently. But for me, it's like, I just think that's a successful remake. It did really well. I liked everybody in it. I thought the cast was real good. They had good chemistry. And just one of the ones that just disturbed me.
Okay. Again, I'm bending my own rules here a little bit. It's kind of a remake, but it's also a re-envisioning of the original source material. A necessary remake that was successful both financially and execution-wise. It. From 2017.
And you just got my last one.
Great minds
Yeah.
think alike.
I love that movie.
Oh my god, it was so good. So, I love the original miniseries.
You have to appreciate it just because we were kids when it came out.
Exactly. Yeah. And but to give the novel its due, you really, like, visually, you had to have a cinematic release. And the main thing everybody was worried about is whether or not Bill Skarsgård was going to be able to fill Tim Curry's shoes. Let me tell you something.
Oh my god.
He didn't need to fill his shoes because he made that character his own.
The way that Skarsgård played him is that he made him this thing that was trying to be a clown, but came off as not executing that very well.
It was almost like he was the demon trying not to be a demon and trying to be a clown.
Yeah, and it just...
like, especially when they go downstairs and he's on his stage and he's doing his, like, weird...
his little dance thing. Oh, that dance was great.
Yeah, that dance was awesome. But it was like, I'm looking at him and I'm just thinking to myself, yeah, he's trying to be a clown. It's almost like he's trying not to be evil. He's trying to entertain these children.
Like I was saying about Jackie Earle Haley as Freddy Krueger. I can't watch that film and just say, okay, this is Jackie Earle Haley reinventing Freddy Krueger. No, this is Jackie Earle Haley trying to play Freddy Krueger. Right. But you're being overshadowed by Robert Englund still. Whereas this one, it's like, I'm not going to play this like Tim Curry played it. Right. I'm going to play this like it's in the book, where it's this thing that's trying to mimic something in order to freak these kids out, to play on their fears. And I think he just did that so beautifully.
He nailed it.
Yeah.
He absolutely nailed it.
Yeah.
Loved Tim Curry's performance
I
as
love
well.
him. Yeah.
But Bill Skarsgård, he stepped out of the iconic shadow that was Tim Curry's performance.
And he established it. I mean, Tim Curry did establish the character, and everybody knew him for, nearly 3 decades as that character. But Skarsgård took it and ran with it and made it and reinterpreted it. And that's what I think these most successful remakes is. You have to reinterpret what came before. You can pay homage to it, but you don't want to copy it, because if you copy it, it's not going to be successful.
No, it's not. It's not an out-and-out remake of the miniseries. I mean, there's elements that they share, and it is definitely more of a reimagining of the novel as opposed to a straight remake of the miniseries. Alrighty, so what do you got next?
That's it. I've gone through all of mine, because we had a couple that we had The Thing and It. Those were 2 that were on your list and 2 that were on mine. So I've gone through my entire list here.
Well, I've got one other one that again kind of bends the rules a little bit, but I'll explain what I mean. So, in my opinion, all of the Hammer remakes of the Universal horror films were not only necessary, but they were successful financially and, execution-wise. Look, they weren't honest and true remakes. Curse of Frankenstein is not a remake of 1931 Frankenstein. Horror of Dracula is not a remake of Bela Lugosi's 1931 Dracula, which in itself was based on the stage play. The Curse of the Werewolf was not a remake of The Wolfman. The only one that was close to being an actual remake, what, as we discussed earlier, was The Mummy. And then also they had The Phantom of the Opera with Herbert Lom, which obviously that's definitely more of a reinterpretation of the Gaston Leroux novel.
Got it.
But here's where you can consider them remakes. If you take the concept of taking all of those horror monster characters and putting them out into the movie theaters again, that's kind of remaking what Universal did back in the 30s and the 40s. So the films individually aren't necessarily remakes, but putting all those monsters out there again in cinematic form when, at the time, as we discussed, more often than not, they were dealing in sci-fi. Universal's big hits, like I said, during the 50s. The only horror monster movie they had in the 50s was The Creature from the Black Lagoon.
Yeah.
That was it. Everything else was sci-fi, like The Mole People or the other one, This Island Earth. And it's not as if either of those movies were true, interpretations of the original source material either. Whereas Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is definitely closer to the book than Boris Karloff's or Christopher Lee's Frankensteins.
Absolutely.
Yes. It's the idea that Hammer had to say, hey, remember all those Universal horror movies? Well, let's do our own and put them all out there. And that's what they did. So I think the idea of putting the monsters back out there in a way is a remake. So it's like the concept was remade. And then the movies were, new interpretations.
Got it.
Yeah.
No, makes sense.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah. And so that's all I got, and we could have gone on forever.
So that's it. Thank you everyone for watching. Thank you, Ray, for allowing me into your vault here.
Yes. Well, I don't know if you're going to be able to get out.
Well,
shoot.
Oh well, this might be the end for me then.
Yeah,
I guess I might not ever make it back to the horror zone. We'll see.
We might as well just leave this on and just watch us crumble into.
Yeah, we'll just turn into dust.
Yeah.
Yeah, like drinking the what was it, the Holy Grail in Last Crusade.
He chose poorly.
All right. Well, thank you so much for watching.
Thank you.
And I'll talk to you guys later. And I got some new stuff coming up. So thanks so much for watching. And stay scared and stay cool. Later.